I gotta tell you, the new TikTok dance just dropped. It's called the Screwworm. It's
Oh,
wild. I think that's what everyone's talking about now. That's what everyone is. But it's wild to me, how often, and what stood me out to me about like these cases and what we're talking about is how many things in the early 2000s that we had eradicated, like from the United States. At least we had it wasn't there anymore. We had no new
I'd honestly had never
cases.
heard of this until, well, recently,
Yeah,
until these articles started coming out.
yeah, and it was interesting. The idea. I was actually when I was interviewing for labs, trying to get back into academia. I actually interviewed with the lab that did the gene drive, the CRISPR gene drive in the mosquitoes. Corey, I don't know if you've heard about it, but
Hmm.
yeah, it was a really cool like breakthrough using CRISPR to basically, each of them would be getting half of a CRISPR. They would be released into the population as they bred. The resulting offspring would have the CRISPR activated. The offspring would die. It turns out they've just been sterilizing flies and releasing them into South America for a really long time. It's been remarkably successful, guys. And we are monitoring efforts in order to watch that happening, or the monitoring the advancements of screwworm from across Central America into the United States has been halted. And now here we are. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced 3 new cases of New World screwworm, including the first cases in dogs and goats on Monday, bringing the nation's total count to 5. It also pledged to ramp up and expedite mitigation efforts for screwworm, a parasitic fly that the nation declared eradicated in the 1960s. At a news briefing on Monday, federal and Texas state officials said that they were using technology driven by artificial intelligence to monitor screwworm populations, training ranchers to recognize infections in their livestock, and expanding the numbers of facilities that produce and disperse sterile flies, which are the primary tool for managing screwworm. Guys, when they just say and throw in, we're using AI to manage,
Don't worry, AI is on the case.
they're just
Sit
they're
back
just
and
talking to
relax.
ChatGPT, guys. They are not using language like neural networks, deep learning. They're it is literally like the worst case of using it. Like they're definitely just putting data into ChatGPT and be like, "What do you think?" You know, and or some intern is who's about to get doged, and now they are. I love that. I love that they're just throwing it. Guys, don't worry. Don't worry. We got it under control. We've got AI on it, and you're just like, I just can't. You just can't make it up, man. You just can't make it up. So, I mean, it's one of those things, you know. It's just yet another example of like these that parasites exist that. And I just was reviewing a video last night. Like these people do not think that like parasites exist. The RFKs of the world, the terrain theory people of the world, they don't feel like parasites are actually real, that viruses exist, that these are just manifestations of microplastics or chemtrails or whatever it is. And now, but in reality, guys, they exist. We have to monitor them. It impacts us, and it's just how good science is at prediction, which is a predictive quality within science. And we have mitigation efforts because of that. And when we hinder that, we don't have those capabilities now, and we can't prevent that from happening. I mean, it really is that simple. And now look where we are. It takes so much more effort, and it's so much harder to get the cat inside the bag. You know what I mean? You gotta prevent it from happening in the first place. And these are all lessons that were, rules that were written in blood. That, how it's 19 since the 1960s, guys. Like, oh, come on.
Yeah, I'm curious because like they mentioned in the article, and you sort of like alluded to it of like, well, so there's guess, multiple solutions. But now one of, I guess, the newer solutions, maybe not newer, but rather a newer approach to the same solution of like one of the primary solutions is creating sterile flies, I think largely male flies, and then introducing them, or like pretty much flooding the zone, these male flies, so that effectively they can't effectively reproduce. But then now we have the tools to do that through genetic modification. And I imagine that's probably like quite efficient. But then it's like, I'm curious if I'm not actually all that curious, but I imagine like there's not going to be public backlash or resistance to using these genetically modified flies, right? Because like, it's genetically modified, like are the ranchers or whatever, the farmers going to reject the use of these genetically modified flies because it's like, well, because they're genetically modified, even though this will probably be like one of the most effective, if not the most effective way to solve the problem. I imagine probably not, since like they recognize that this will be, well, they'll probably recognize the technology is good and that's effective.
Exactly. The same people are telling us that DNA isn't the basis of heredity, and here we are using, we're using knockouts in order to, the knockout protein, like the knockout DNA is literally being inherited and causing these problems. The Novo fly contains genes for two unusual proteins. In males, these proteins have known effects aside from sterility, but they cause females to die at the embryonic stage. So the only Novo fly to reach adulthood, unless tetracycline, a antidote to the genetic modification, is administered, is a sterile male. It's never been tested in the field, and that has to be the next step. Sweet, guys.
But like, yeah, will there be resistance to testing in the field? Because like, oh, we can't introduce these genetically modified organisms. Like, again, there's a significant proportion of the population that's against genetically modified foods. So it's like, I would have to imagine, or, I would assume consistency would be at play. Not that I expect consistency, or I expect not. It's like, these people will not be consistent.
It's interesting you say that, because the gene drive, the example that I was talking to you about, it did have hybridization there was some hybridization that did exist that that we saw, like, and so it's not it's not 100%. There's going to be somehow, like, sometimes you're going to have parts of these genetic components that just exist sometimes out in the wild, and like what those recombinations can be over time, like, we don't know. It can be it's
although this technology seems different from what I can tell.
Like, it's not a CRISPR based gene drive, but I'm just saying that biological control agents where you are introducing an organism in order to it's not as clean. Novofly is considered a pesticide. It would typically be subject to lengthy approval process before being released into the environment. However, because of the public health and economic dangers associated with the screwworm outbreak, the EPA is considering an emergency use authorization, guys.
Boy, why would we need any regulation? Right? Isn't that the whole point of this administration? No regulation. That's let it rip. Right?
I love the idea of like the Trump admin going like, after all that stuff with the EUA and the COVID vaccine, now all of a sudden they're using it again for Maha and all these guys. Like, it's just,
well, now that we have a real problem with the screwworm, better to accelerate the use.
Yeah,
of this technology.
I mean, kind of like going back to what Prime was talking about. It's like, well, I'm happy that they're using the emergency use authorization. This is exactly what it's for. It's more of the hypocrisy, right? It's more of like the fact that these people are just openly hypocrites, but they are. And that is their superpower. That is the Republican superpower, that they can be hypocrites, and it's actually a strength for them, because they do it and it's right, and Democrats do it when it's wrong, and that's what it is, and that's what it always will be.
I mean, it's I can concede it. It is an advantage to not be handcuffed by consistency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What morals? What is that? I mean, like, Prime, do you think that, like, how? I mean, here it's just another example, right? Of RFK comes in, all of a sudden he spends his entire adult life suing Monsanto against about glyphosate, and then as soon as he comes in, glyphosate ramps up production. You know, there's emergency use authorization for something that is less controlled than a vaccine, but here they are. You know, like just using the powers of the of the government. I mean, do you think that, like, in terms of hypocrisy, do you think that is it like, can we learn something from this to actually just that maybe like all these the Southern Belle, like, oh my God, I can't believe that the Democrats would do this, or you know what I mean? Like maybe we shouldn't be tied to this Republican media circus, right? That we as people that want to make a better world, that we can just kind of move forward and not have to be dragged down into the pits of this Republican algorithm world.
I'm not sure there's much to be learned from uh, Republican like hypocrisy. I mean, like it's self-evident, it's known, right? Like if you don't accept it, it's because you're part of the MAGA cult. Like there's, I mean, like there's a billion examples. I mean, we've given them, and we'll give more in the future, right? But just like how much more is there to learn? I mean, it's to be useful for propaganda, I guess, but only, but not even that much though. Like it's like, yeah, I mean, this government just doesn't care and doesn't follow the same rules. So I don't know how in the end like useful that is, right? Like um but like I think it's just you know, talking about like the screwworms. I just want to go back to what Corey said previously, which dovetails on what we had said in the previous section. Corey said that he had never heard of this beforehand. I hadn't either, right? And I imagine most
Me
of
neither.
you hadn't. And that was because government worked. Like government worked. It handled it. It was done, right? Like there was a division of I don't know how many people who had this job and like had funding to manage this, and it was handled. It was done well, right? Decades without a significant outbreak. That is an incredible government success. So successful that you never heard of it, right? And
True.
now that it's been screwed up, now that ignoramuses have been put in charge, right? Know nothings. Um, the world, well, at least the United States, has become aware, right? The general population is learning these things called screwworms, huh? What is that, right? And yeah, like for those of us who are paying attention, are we are learning about like these great efforts that were undermined, right? And I'm not sure if this actually happened. I suspect it might have at some point in time, but I'm not sure. But like we've heard stories like this before, right? Where um, Fox News, conservative media, gets a hold of some sort of the research study or government grant going towards some sort of like study of some obscure animal, right? Like, and what we're talking about here is like the mating habits of flies, right? Like,
Yeah,
look
exactly.
how much money, yeah, millions of dollars are going into like altering the mating habits of flies. Now, you can imagine that news section of Fox News being played continuously, right? Going through the Republican fever dream, and like, oh, but this is yet another example of government waste, right? Government waste.
Mhm.
Obviously, there could be no reason to do that. One, like, let's pretend screwworms weren't some sort of pernicious uh, uh, organism, right? Like, let's just imagine they were an interesting fly or organism that was just like being studied, right? that could have incredible implications one way or the other, like whether we know or not, right? We don't know what'll be interesting until we actually take a look at it, right? So yeah, actually like gaining knowledge can be useful because that can come in maybe decades later, right?
Mhm.
But in a critical moment, once you've already done the research and it's already out there, just putting that out, just making that clear. But in this case, no, it actually has direct practical implications. But if this was like went through the conservative fever dream, right? The fever swamp of media, yeah, this would have been turned into their next boogeyman, right? Another example how government fails, and we just need a businessman to come in there and clean things up, obviously, right? Like, I mean, so like that's the thing that I'm more interested in examining, right? Because I think, once again, we have to like let people know like what does government do, right? Now, I don't think you could have ever made the screwworm interesting, to be clear, honestly, until this happened, right? And people can understand like the direct link between that and like beef prices. I don't think like it would really take a disaster like that we're facing now to make it
Probably.
salient to people. There are plenty of examples, plenty of the programs, right?
Yeah.
That are easier to draw links to. And people just like we just need to have be constantly be surfacing this, right? Like if the if Republicans can like do news conferences, right, and go on programs, or the conservative news outlets to talk about like how this program is failing or it's waste, whatever, right? Like we could actually just do the opposite, right? We could just like go on these programs. We mean Democrats, corporate Democrats, but at least maybe
Your favorite.
yeah, but more lefty Democrats in which way. But like you could just go on and just make the opposite case, right? Like we could just like not even we could just talk about like, hey, like this is a set of programs that we've been looking at, right? And this is how they've been affecting you. And what I want to do is I want to increase this, right? You find success stories, things that are actually working, things that are making people's lives better, and that you can draw some sort of significant link towards, right? And we're like, this is incredible. In fact, we should be increasing this. Let's educate the public as to what this is, what it does, how it works, and how it's related to you, and then say, hey, actually, why don't we increase this? That's what I'm fighting for, rather than constantly being on the defensive, right? As Republicans try to cut things, and then Democrats just trying to maintain what they have or lessen the amount of damage you're going to do through the budget, right? Actually, make a proactive case. No, we're going to increase this because why? This helps you.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And also maybe just to like expand a little bit, where so multiple things. Well, one, going back to a point I've made before, it's like a lot of rhetoric gets thrown around in terms of like whatever third world countries, right? But then it's like, well, U.S. has a measles outbreak. You now have the screwworm, which I believe, according to the article, like that's the result of like pretty much like I think coming from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, I think the case is mounting more and more that the United States is a third world country. But also, another case you made as to why the U.S. should care about what goes on in other countries. Of like, if this was the result of coming from Mexico, or like whatever migratory patterns were coming from Mexico, it's like, well, what if the United States implemented a similar program or had I think the United States has a vested interest in eradicating the screwworm in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
right? And why not either help them with their own program? Because it's like, well, as has been said many times before, viruses no borders, and parasitic infections no borders. And so it's like, yes, you can maybe close off your borders to people, but things like parasites, like in this case, and viruses, like a border or a wall is not all that effective.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom tweeted out like, "Can we have this one back?" Like, and it was exactly what Prime was talking about, where it was some Fox News article being like, they're trying to they're trying to breed flies in South America for tens of millions of dollars, you know, and it's just like, well, yeah, it happened to be like these flies specifically for this reason. And Rand Paul and Ron Paul do the same thing every year. It's like their most hated like freaking their most hated governmental scientific funded, you know, projects that they're joking about. But you know, it's just that type of ideology doesn't build anything, you know, like they're not saying like it's better to build it to build it in this direction. They're just trying to burn down the house. Like at least science and this spending, like whether or not these things get approved, you know, the money, the pool is given to the NSF, NIH, DOE, or whatever that agency is by Congress. And then those specific grants and those awards are given out by their peers democratically within their subgroups, you know. So these professors go and they basically present to each one another like how, where, and how these grants should be awarded, and they choose, you know, what is the best research and development grant. You know, this stuff like is I don't think that this is necessarily like research and development wise, but like the one that they're talking about for the new flies, that would be in that pool that we'd had to have developed that for years in order to actually have that. But Prime, I wanted to give you a shot at this. There's a chat that said, "You guys are intoxicated with the two sides of the aisle. The most prosperous future is not on either." So I'm curious, like, what your thought is on that, Prime.
Not entirely sure what that means.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, do you, what I guess I don't know. I guess like we are talking about in general the, you know, how Republicans are uniquely bad at doing this, like and the Republicans being so anti-science and anti institutional knowledge is absolutely pushing us in the bad direction. So I think that is a very apparent. So like I don't think that you could say otherwise. But yeah, that's.
I mean, this has happened on this administration's. Like, it's hard for me to imagine. Although I guess nothing is possible. Like, can they blame the Biden administration for this? I don't think they can. I don't think there's any meaningful way that they. So, but like, will this administration receive any sort of penalty, or like, you know, is this going to result in any sort of meaningful loss? And obviously not. You know, and at the end of the day, like, is this a major problem now? No, but I think it has the potential to like potentially spiral out of control. But either way, at least optically, it's not a good look to have something that has been considered eradicated for whatever 50, 60 years, and then now has returned. And now you have to actively monitor it and spend probably more resources than you need to hopefully get it eradicated again, or like truly under control. But then it's like, well, yeah, if this is on this administration's watch, that should be a bad look for them.
Yeah.
And they should pay a political cost for that. Do I expect them to? No.
I mean, the people that I debate and the panels that I'm on, the Republicans say that this is just another like, it must be an election year. That's what their thing. Oh, more fear.
Isn't like, well, I'm not an expert on U.S. politics, but is it like virtually like every year an election year? Virtually every other year?
Like that. I mean, it's like because they're like, oh, it's, you know, wow, it was bird flu. Now it's hantavirus. Now then it was Ebola. Now it's screwworm.
Yes, that's how nature works. Like, yes, there's yes.
Exactly. I mean, it's just it's wild to me that people are still coming to grasp with how the reality, like that we don't live in a hermetically sealed bubble. Like humans exist, and our health is tied with environmental health, guys. So when we don't monitor and we're not involved with, you know, coronavirus bat cave monitoring, it impacts our ability to have better vaccines and flu vaccines and things like that. Like yes. it's just
Humans
true.
can ignore nature, but at some point, nature will not ignore you. Like you
That's a
can't-
good way to put it. Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
like yeah, as you said, like we have all of this technology. Not that we have perfected everything, and far from it. But like obviously, technology is better than ever, and advancing at pretty accelerated pace. And it's like, yeah, to impede that, or like to get in the way of implementing these technologies, or not using them to, let's say, monitor nature more and understand nature more, is just like it's not going to work out. Well, we see it not work out in the long run. Like,
yeah,
nature is brutal. Like,
I guess like Prime, I'm curious about your thoughts on like I'm curious is the future like a technocratic solution where we can figure out like apolitically, not ideologically, how to like make these systems better, or to for monitoring and science and funding and that kind of thing? Do we remove like kind of like separate out science spending and the CDC and the EPA and stuff, like not even tie it to congressional spending, like voting at all? So then the president and the Democrats and the Republicans can't even touch it? Or is it to like bring in, you know, a third party or way or group to that could usher in and change the Democratic Party, because it seems like the Republican Party is lost at this point. So I guess like people that want to try to improve the world, do you think that we could kind of like the Fed, like should we take out the science spending from the government entirely? But I'm just curious, like what your thoughts are, Democrat versus Republican, and on this kind of stuff.
I mean, Corey, you already knows my answer. Absolutely everything's political. So it's foolish.
which I agree with.
It's foolish to ever think otherwise. Everything is political. Either it's subtle politics or currently divisive politics. That's the only difference. But it's all political. Um, Science spending is not a thing that has enough political support to be somehow sanctioned off in the government budget. Um, I wish it did. And I guess automatic renewals for grant spending and the whatnot. That would be great, but like it doesn't have the political support to like for something like that. But I mean, I guess I wouldn't be opposed to it if that was the case. Even then, that would be political, and even then, it would need defenders. Um, uh, like Social Security is sort of cordoned off in that way, but Social Security is constantly under attack, and it needs defenders. Um, so no, there is no path forward where, at least currently, there isn't a fight. Like the path forward, I think, is maybe like winning the conversation about science, like getting the public back on track with like science education and like an understanding of how important these things are. And so like destroying this narrative, this anti-science narrative. I don't know how likely that is to happen anytime in the near term, and I feel like the only time the way that might happen would be through some sort of disaster that like the public has to face. The idiots in the within the public have to face the obviousness of their foolish mistakes. Screwworm is not going to do it, right? And this measles outbreak isn't going to do it. It's not deadly enough, right? If there was some sort of situation where like there was a stark difference between the survivability rates of people who did take a vaccine and those who didn't take a vaccine, and that like there was more bodies piling up in the streets, maybe that would do it. But short of something visual that these idiots can interact with, like a corpse, within their lives, like I don't know what would necessarily do it for them. The best thing I think to do would be just educate people before they go into um, they go down that route, rather than having to change someone's mind, like actually educate people, actually uh, have a good science foundation, and equip them with the tools to think critically about the claims from charlatans like RFK Jr. That's probably the best route. Again, it's a long-term route, and we have to wait for those voters, right, those young people, to grow up and then become active voters, for them to make a difference. But yeah, until then, there's no shortcuts, I think, in this fight. No easy way, no like fancy legislation that gets us out of the struggle against the simpletons.
Yeah.
And going back to, I think, what you mentioned earlier, in terms of well, pretty much you mentioned like, how, let's say, the Republican or right-leaning media apparatus, they'll run stories of like, that makes certain scientific research look bad, even though there's probably like legit and valid scientific research actually being conducted. But then, you were also making the case, like, well, maybe corporate Democrats should, respond to that, or be making the case for these programs. In that vein, like basically, like, yes, in some sense, whatever the White House or an administration has like has some semblance of PR. But do you think there's a case to be made of like, an administration needs like a full dedicated PR team to make the case for all of these programs, and to really make all of these things salient in the public, as opposed to like whatever. And I guess in this case, it's someone like Caroline Levitt for this administration,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just like one person,
Yeah,
as opposed to like a dedicated PR team.
yeah, I'd say so. And it's an interesting idea. To like have an office specifically dedicated to messaging on this issue.
Science
And
communication
educating
office.
Yeah, a science communication office. Yeah,
Yeah.
that might be. Yeah. I actually like that idea, Corey. Not something I'd considered before, but like, yeah, I mean, this will be a Democratic administration exclusive office, because the moment Republicans get in, they dismantle it. But that's fine. Actually, you don't need that. That'd be fine. But like, yeah, to during their time, like push these messaging, and maybe like organize, like not just like from like the White House podium, where like just like the political junkies like you and I, right, would see that messaging. Like, we don't need to be turned, right? Like, we would need more local and direct communication to reach people wherever they are, and help with that, right? And then maybe like provide tools for schools, and programs, and more importantly, funding, if at all possible, to reach people. I think that'd be pretty interesting. It's a good idea, Corey.
Yeah.
I occasionally have those every once in a while.
You get lucky.
But like, yeah, a broken clock is right twice a day. There's definitely a case you made that I am broken. But because like, yeah, in this article, and as we just highlighted multiple times, like I never heard of Screwworm before, headlines like this. And like going through the article, there was a little bit of like history and like, yeah, making it known that it was considered eradicated, 50, 60 years ago. But like, yeah, I'm Canadian, so I'm, just by proximity or distance. I don't know if screwworm was ever a problem in Canada, because we have, tend to have harsh winters, and that typically eradicates many things. But it seems like you Americans were also not aware of it, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe we're at one point, maybe we're younger, but like it was not salient in your mind. So then and I would say, generally speaking, you're probably overall pretty informed overall. So like, I can only imagine if I'm extrapolating to the general public, they're largely, unless like, there's someone that was 60 or 70 years old, if you're of a younger age, like we are here, you're just not going to be aware of it. But then like, unless you read an article like this, you're not going to be aware of the history. You're not going to be aware of like how there was some sort of program that resulted in its eradication. And that's where I would hope, or like in my thinking is like, well, maybe some dedicated PR team that like makes the rounds in all of the media apparatus that, makes all the points in this article, or even expands upon it. So like, actually pointed the program. What was the strategy? It was the result, the eradication, and well, highlighting what went wrong in this case. Yeah.
And I
So
mean,
I think,
this only is going to get worse, guys. Parasites are living through the winters now. Like they aren't being, they aren't going away because of harsh winter conditions anymore. So that's why they continually go northern expansion, and we're seeing, and we're going to see more and more of this going forward. Like insects are going to be able to live longer, further, and as the winters become less harsh. And I think that genuinely this is and only one example, but I do feel like the future is not going to be with these type of mass meat programs that we have on a national level. Like I just don't think that these are there's too many external threats. And if you're a farmer, you're going to have climate change, you're going to have parasites, you're going to have, all these different things that are coming in that could impact your profit margins. So in the future, you're just going to have farmers say, I'm just going to make my meat cells inside of my bioreactor is going to be a fermentation tank, and my bioreactor is not going to be a cow. There is going to be some incentive shift happen away against living animals. And I really do feel like the United States, like a good way to prevent exposure to stuff like this and a change that's going to happen is going to have to be shifting our farmers insurance and that kind of thing, and start incentivizing like microbial protein production versus mammalian protein production. So I do feel like the future is in plants and lab grown like meat, basically.
I mean, I agree, but also, I'm also biased, but in a good way, since I'm largely vegan. But everything that you said, I agree with. But in my mind, it should, it almost certainly has to be also coupled with like a cultural shift of like people actually accepting these lab grown meats or these genetically modified organisms or food coming from a bioreactor, right? Because like, I think there's a significant proportion of the population that will not accept lab grown meat.
I think it's smaller than we think, and people, it's going to be so expensive. Like steak and stuff is going to be so expensive.
I don't disagree in terms of like once the economics works out, again, ideology goes out the window once, once their pocketbook is affected, or they see that it's easier on their pocketbook or on their money. But I'm sure there will still be some holdouts. But I'm curious,
for sure.
And I agree with everything that you said in terms of like how climate change will affect, let's say, migration patterns of parasites and microbes, all that stuff. Did you know if that's relevant in this case here? I think it was maybe touched upon in the article of like as a result of like I think the migratory patterns of the screwworm, but that like their migratory patterns I think get extended through climate change, but I could be making that up in my mind.
We could be facing, is it a La Nina year or two on top of that? So you might just have like a double woozy happening there. I don't know.
Anyway, whether it's relevant, it is relevant overall. I agree with your assessment.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I think it's only going to get worse. And Afon said it in chat. I totally agree. Climate change, the increase in threats, increase in these threats because there's no more winter frost as a firewall. Yeah, exactly. Afon.
Yeah.
It's just the future is not going to be with the animals, guys. There's just too much of a question
mark. But you can
go
vegan now, just FYI. You don't have to wait for these technological breakthroughs.
But I do feel like making it at the consumer I do feel like in order to make the biggest impact, we have to have systems in place that make it no change for the consumer. that makes it as effortless as
agree.
possible. But I agree, like ethically and for sure. I mean, but we'll just have to see when that shift happens. Like for example, I know that shift is probably going to happen with like corn ethanol, and as we, you know, I hope move away from internal combustion engines into EVs. You know, we're going to have basically all these cornfields that are being grown for specifically that 10% requirement in our gasoline for corn ethanol. As that is not needed, there's going to be more farm space just in general in the United States that's going to be needed to be utilized for something. So I do feel like that is going to happen. That's if friggin' Becerra doesn't try to walk back California's friggin' EV mandate by 2050, which is just insane that he would.
That's being entertained. As
Yes, dude, I cannot believe him. He is like such an embarrassment, dude. I can't even believe it. But anyway,
but yeah, I agree with your
2035
assessment.
actually, I think.
And and I've posed this hypothetical to people, especially in vegan debates that I have. But like, yeah, if or when, probably more when plant-based beef, okay, or whatever that looks like, but actual beef, as in like when it's side by side in the supermarket, and it tastes exactly the same, and it's the same price, it's like most people will choose the plant-based, as in like, but like as long as like taste is fully replicated, as in like you cannot determine the difference in taste, and the price is the same. Like most people seem to naturally gravitate towards the plant-based option.
For sure. Oh, question. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say of like, but then what do we do? Because I have no doubt that there's going to be whatever 1%, 5%, 10% of the population that like they will not make the switch. But at that point, but like I'm curious how you would view this person of like, would you judge this person as being less ethical or moral? Of like, as in like this person making the calculation of like, I need to buy this animal-based beef, knowing that it's slaughtered from an animal, as opposed to the plant-based option, even though I cannot tell the difference and it's the exact same price.
I feel like that's the more that ethically that's very because suffering is involved when there didn't need to be. So I think that ethically it definitely makes sense to go against the bioreactor animal. A question from chat: what is the ecological duty we have to livestock species post meat central diets? I mean, the domesticated livestock animals, there is no ecological purpose that they hold. They actually harm the environment specifically through methane production and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm sure in this post world there would be maybe some hybrids that were made, but I don't know if they would be released in the wild like wolves in Yellowstone. I don't think it'll
be that bad. Like, this is not a big issue to solve. Like, I mean, taking it as our friend Corey according to Dr. Kirk presented, right? In which, right, let's say bioreactors or whatever, maybe some other method, like get so good that we can have some sort of perfect acceptable market replacement. I mean, like adoption won't be immediate, right? Like people have to learn about this, understand it, right? And then it's got to spread. We got to try it. And all that, right? Adoption rates will ramp up, and as adoption rates ramp up, like prices will fall for regular meat, right? Except for those who are like ideologically committed to it. But like that'll fall, and then cattle herders will have less money. Many of those will go out of business. There won't be people breeding these cows. These herds will go down, right? They'll be sold to other markets where like the adoption rates haven't risen so far, right? Let's say like this is at first,
or that's the new domesticated pet for the luxury family is owning a cow.
I don't know about that part, but like but yeah, so for well-off nations, maybe this some sort of technology like this will probably be the first place to spread. But in other nations like and lower income nations, it'll get to them last. So those cows will be shifted there. And so anyway, the point is that by the time we have some sort of a global post-world shift, like those cow herds will have been like greatly diminished. So it won't be like that big of a thing.
Exactly. Totally agree. Any closing thoughts, guys, on this or anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I guess one last point that I'll add on, and actually was brought up in chat, is like, regardless of if or when, the full plant-based substitute arrives to the market and there's widespread adoption, there will still probably be a place, or even like, well, actually going back to the hypothetical of like, how do we judge the person of like, this person is willing to pay a premium for the slaughtered cow option?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Should that be available at that point?
$1,000 a steak, literally.
Yeah. I don't want to live in that world personally, but it would not surprise me if that's somewhere down the road.
I mean, like Elon Musk could spend $1 million a steak, so he has all the money in the world that he could ever want. Well, thank you guys. Thank you. Go Prime. Sorry.
I want to tackle that for a second. Yeah, you should be able to. You absolutely 100% should. You should, like, if you're going to take on the expense, you should be able to get yourself a natural cow. There's going to be, like, it's hard to imagine a world where there's literally no market for this like period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I could see this being a luxury for like the most like well off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know, like in actuality, I don't know whoever has something that is completely 1-to-1. Maybe it will, right? But even like in Star Trek, right, with the replicators, right? Like even those things didn't like fully like match like the real thing. Like they did a fantastic job, but like you're not even then.
Okay, yeah, but we're not comparing replicator or trying to develop replicator technology. Like,
yeah, we're doing something worse. There's something worse.
Well, no, but that was like pure fantasy, as opposed to like we're taking meaningful steps to a bioreactor. Now,
yeah, I didn't say that we weren't. I understand what the problem is, but like built into your hypothetical was that this would be like a 1-to-1 replacement, and it's probably not going to be the case. There'll probably be some difference, and it doesn't have to be a significant difference. It might be so little that in the end, people do make the moral choice or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But still, like 1-to-1, maybe I could be wrong, but like
I see no reason why. Not only can it not be 1-to-1, like as in like probably even like better taste and probably actually overall better quality control, because you just have more control over a bioreactor. Like you can. I would say it's much easier to tweak the flavor in a bioreactor versus an entire cow and the meat that it produces. Just like we see it now with like, it's not a 1-to-1, but all the food science that goes into developing like the perfect Dorito that you can't stop eating.
Once the steak hits your mouth, it just dissolves. You're like, yeah.
Okay, fine. That's fine. I can work with this. Let's say yes. It's everything that Corey says, right? Okay. Everything that Corey says is the case. Still, people are going to want the real thing. There's going to be an interest, right? Even if it's just psychological.
Should that be an option though?
Yes.
You're saying,
that's what I was saying before.
Okay, yeah, I know. Okay, well, then I'm going to push back because like I think that then there's an ethical question. There's a more salient ethical question, as in, for example, this is not an exactly 1-to-1 analogy, but like, okay, if or when, we get to true autonomous driving cars, and it's borne out in the data that truly autonomous self-driving cars are safer than human-driven cars, should a human have the right to drive a car?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. I don't know that I would. I'm on the opposite side of that.
I could be in favor of putting incentives so that people don't drive cars themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But like even if it's safer, that should we give up a complete lack of control? Like, are these things? it's safe in that like the actual like ability to get a human from point A to point B, right? Will be
In
less
every metric that we can
factor.
currently measure, it is safe.
I'm with you. That they can go from one place to another, but like, are they secure? Like, are they capable of hacking? And what restrictions could the government put on the ability of these cars to travel from wherever? Right? Will some people want the ability to travel without putting it within some sort of system that could be accessed by the government as to where they went, right? Like assuming they can disable anything that's getting off a signal as well.
Mhm.
But the point is that, like, yeah, people should be able to go to places anonymously if they want. So there are other factors beyond safety that should
I don't disagree.
absolutely be.
But like, if it's shown that like, again, this is like almost pure fantasy, but like, if we get to the world of like, we're now in the place that autonomous driving, it's like any sort of auto fatality, it just like never happens.
Huh?
It's like it's more like down to zero. Uh, Even in that world, like that, yeah.
We should wildly incentivize people to not drive in that world.
Yeah.
I'm for all kinds of incentivizations. I want that world. I'd be one of the people who almost would never drive. I could see a situation where I might need to. And I should have that option without necessarily being punished for it, right? Maybe the punishments are extra harsh if I like get into an accident, or something, or especially if I, take a life, because it's just never extra level of negligence because there
Mhm.
was a safer option. So but I'd be willing to allow for this, right? I think and you incentivize most people. Most people will take that option, and most people will like there'll be a social stigma against driving at some point. That might take a lot to happen, but like that all will work itself out. But absolutely not having the ability to drive, even in an emergency, even if the car is somehow damaged, right? The auto pilot is damaged, and now, well, no one's allowed. There's no steering wheel. I can't move this vehicle. What's
Well,
an
I imagine
emergency?
like in this ultra future, like autonomous cars will not have steering wheels.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's what I'm
yeah.
saying. That's what I'm saying. Like a place where it doesn't have steering wheels at all, and that means like, well, this is a hunk of junk when we need to move people for whatever reason. Like we can't use the autopilot, and now we're completely reliant on the computer. At that point, that seems like a bad idea for a number of reasons. Actually, yeah. The more I think about it, the more I think that would be a disaster.
Yeah, but so like expanding out of like the like, let's say if we get to my world, probably there's probably going to be like no car manufacturer that's going to manufacture like a car with a steering wheel, because like no one's gonna, the market's gonna be so small.
Mhm.
But then like
Oh.
should someone, if you have a response to that, go for it.
Oh, I mean, but like if at that point, like if you're saying, well, no one has the ability to drive because like the government has mandated, or somehow, I don't know, for whatever reason we no longer have like the physical hardware to do so, then I don't know, the point is moot, right? Like
No,
you
that's
just
what
can't.
I wasn't done with my point of like,
Okay.
should someone have the right to like, as in like they have enough money and resources like to commission a custom car that now has a steering wheel that can self-drive.
Old school.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess. And this seems like a very strange world, but like, sure, yeah.
I mean, we do have
Yeah, yes.
we have banned like frog law, and other types of like protein production specific ways,
Yeah.
like in our society, and I do feel like there's, I do think
What's
this is
Bagua?
That's where pretty much ducks are force fed, generally speaking, with a tube to pretty much create a high fat liver. If I
Yeah.
remember correctly, that's
yeah,
what it
fatty
is.
liver.
Mm.
Yeah, and I do think this is one of my bold predictions that I think that's going to happen in our lifetimes. I do think that humans are going to be banned from driving on the freeways by insurance companies. Insurance companies are going to say, we can't afford, and you can, if you want to, as a human, drive on a freeway, but it's just going to cost too much. It's $100,000 a month in order to do it. So it effectively like bans it to the point because they're not going to want to.
Unless they're ultra wealthy, but there's going to be wealthy people.
Yeah,
right?
there's gonna. I think that you're just not going. They're not going to be able to do it. There's going to be lawsuits and stuff because like human drivers are so unpredictable, and there's going to be high speed, like too fast for human reaction speeds, cars driving on the freeway autonomously, and they're going to say, hey, if you want to drive, you can drive. You can't drive on the freeways. You can drive on side streets to wherever you want, but freeways are going to be AI like driven, like robots only. So
You're basically saying Minority Report. I hear you, but like I don't. I mean, look, I'm fine with that, you know. But like the question was, should we not be able to drive at all? And
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that you're gonna have basically like tracks and race car like kind of like things kind of like popping off because of that. I think you're going to have a lot more people going to these places and kind of driving like people used to, and people will be like, okay, you can drive as fast as you want on the racetrack, but like you know, here we're not going. And there's going to be a lot of more people like that are interested in like racing cars and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the ethical or moral compass will shift, as in like to your point, Greg, with the foie gras. It's like even people that eat meat, they generally like. There's a reason why this practice is largely, or it's a growing banning across the world, because it's like even though they're okay with the cows and the pigs, but like force feeding a duck.
There's some line.
Is like that's a step too far, and I obviously I don't know for sure, and I guess maybe we'll find out, but like I foresee that it will get to the point of like if autonomous driving is so safe that like pretty much like no car fatalities happen, it's going to be viewed as unethical to be a self-driver, and people will just not tolerate it, and it will be in effect, well, as in laws will probably be passed because it's so unethical to drive under those systems.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Just as it's viewed as in our concept of animal welfare has evolved, that like yes, even meat eaters recognize that foie gras is probably not the greatest practice, and that like it should be outlawed. I think our moral compass is further and further shifting in that direction.
I agree.
Welfare. And so it's like that's where at least the case that I'm making is like if or when we get to the place of like plant-based or bioreactor meat can truly replace animal-based meat, I think the moral compass will shift that like, yes, this is now just so morally outrageous that you should not have the right to consume animal-based meat.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a black market for it, sure, but like you can't just like have an elephant steak, like you know, like because it's like an endangered or whatever. I mean, like, so you're always going to have a black market because they'll be banned, but I don't think that it's going to be legal and permissible. But
yeah, that's my speculation.
Yeah,
and I would agree with that. As in that ethical framework, I don't personally think you should have the right to pay for whatever your $1,000 or $1 million steak just for the luxury of saying I ate a slaughtered animal, even though it tastes the same.
Yeah.
That seems weird to me.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's gonna be to the point where it's good enough, and people are just like, what? Why are we allowing this anymore? So hopefully, maybe. Or we just all go extinct because nobody cares about the environment and it all overpowers us, and we live in fallout like dugout holes in the ground. We'll see. Anything else that you guys wanted to add on this?
No, not on my end.
All right. You guys
I'm at twitch.tv, youtube.com, /PrimeKai, PrimeCays. Love to have you. Thanks so much.
And you can find me on Twitch, CoreyCam84, Twitter, X, YouTube, Instagram, Substack, TikTok. It's Corey Campbell. And always a pleasure. Looking forward to next week.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you as always. Have a good one.
Take care. Be well.
Likewise. All right, guys. That was fun. I always love talking to them. Cool. What do you guys think? I'm curious what